Good morning, everyone. It is Wednesday, January 14th of 2026. Welcome to the Wednesday podcast. So, as I've been telling you, I've got three segments. If I were running for governor of Illinois for 2026, if um, the other one is what's going on in the legislature. And then lastly, what my podcast was about for US federal government policy. And that's more of updates. So let's dig in. So if I were running for governor of Illinois, a lot's happened this week. And I saw on TV that the Republican side, uh, people running for governor are finally speaking out. Um, and it looks like that there is some chatter about taxes in the state. Hopefully, they listened to my podcast to get some ideas. Today, though, if I were running for governor of Illinois, I would like to talk about mass transit in Illinois in general. So, I live in Southern Illinois in the Metro East. And like I had previously told you guys, perception is that everything in the Metro East, news wise at least, centers around St. Louis. So we living in the Metro East don't really hear about the rest of Illinois. But here is a perception. Tax wise, people's perception in this area is that we are heavily taxed because of Cook County. Now, whether that's true or not, we're going to dig into that and get some facts. The fact is that Metro East folks have strong values, and also voting wise, we have high numbers of voters in this part of Illinois. So for a statewide election, like the governor of Illinois, we have power. And as I've said several times, the podcast is about giving people information so that we can make informed decisions when we go out and vote. The perception is that all of our money goes toward um, Chicago, especially for mass transit. So I looked it up, and a little bit of background is important. So, mass transit in Illinois is funded through a combination of federal, state, and local sources, with the majority of funding coming from local sources, primarily regional sales taxes and system generated revenue, which is the fares. So in Chicago, supposedly that's where most of it is coming from. Now, there is more information. So let me give you some background. So the background is really talking about a new law that was passed by the governor of Illinois, Governor Pritzker, and he signed it into law in December of 2025. So it provides 1.5 billion to stabilize Chicago area transit agencies, the CTA, Metra, and PACE, to avoid looming fiscal cliff or service cuts. Now, that's why the Republicans and people in the Metro East got the opinion, based on their own words, that they had to bail out the Chicago Transit Authority, and it looks like that they did that. Now, I believe if I were running for governor, that it should be an equitable distribution of funds versus the rest of the state filling in the gaps for Chicago. Now, let me dig in some more here. So, what I'm talking about is a perceived opinion of people in the Metro East of inequities for downstate and suburban residents, as well as the diversion of infrastructure funds. So, what that meant was not only did they bail out the Chicago Transit Authority, they did the monies so it wasn't an equal mix coming from Chicago on that. So, thus, given the impression that it was heavily coming from the people in Southern Illinois, the Metro East. So, here's what happens. So the law redirected roughly 860 million in motor fuel sales tax revenue and 200 million in interest from the state's road fund to transit operations. So the argument from Republicans was uh, these were raids, money traditionally reserved for highway and bridge construction, particularly hurting downstate infrastructure. Now, a real world example is in Belleville, Illinois. I've been riding on those roads for 10 years, and the roads are terrible. And as a matter of fact, in part of the city of Belleville and Shiloh, the roads need to be widened because of the traffic congestion. So that's what transit money, which is being taken out from motor funds, should be used for, not to bail out mass transit in Chicago because it was mismanaged by the folks there. And that's what's making it frustrating for the people in this part of Illinois. Now, the governor and the legislature, they are doing that. They're showing favoritism to Chicago when it should be equal among the state, and it incentivizes uh, Chicago politicians because it's not the people, because probably most of them don't even realize that they did it. Now, the elected officials there, they would. And so that's why I keep saying that that legislature is tied in for why we need to vote more Republicans in to the legislature, because if it was fair, the wording would have been different, that the people of Chicago, based on bad leadership of the elected officials, should have to pay more in taxes to bail it out. Shouldn't have been the rest of the state. And oh, by the way, they are getting federal funding probably up until January 20th, right? Because during COVID, there was a huge infrastructure bill that came to Illinois, federal funds. What happened to that money? And that leads me to also say that we need to start doing audits in Illinois of when the money comes in and where did it go. And there should be no reason ever for any politician, meaning the governor and that legislature, to hold funds that are supposed to benefit the taxpayers in Illinois for infrastructure, for roads, mass transit, etc. And if I were running for governor in the Chicago area, Cook County, maybe they should do tolls again so that people that are driving on the roads can help maintain the roads. And so, and if they need to raise the prices, the tolls occasionally to bring in revenue, that's what it's for. Other states do that. Florida does that. Uh, Probably even a state like Texas does. It has to be managed by the legislature, the Chicago politicians, to keep that infrastructure updated. Now, as I've told you, in this part of the state, the Metro East, we felt like that they were bailing out Democratic lawmakers in Chicago area for bad management of funds. Now, if we want to look at this also, I would bet you money that with the pension funds, the Democrats have done that as well with the legislature. So, as I told you in the beginning, the perception is actually true. And it comes down to the wording. Now, let me talk about funding sources. As I've told you, for mass transit, people of Chicago do pay some of that. I don't know how much it is, but apparently it's not enough to cover the expenses and the infrastructure. And that's where the issues are coming in. They also have a real estate tax, transfer tax to do the same thing. So when I'm getting into, without getting into the weeds on it, it's been poor management by the elected officials in Chicago, lack of planning, and who knows, maybe the money is being directed toward other things. And the suspicion is that money is being moved because you do know that Chicago is a sanctuary city. And maybe money's being moved from that fund to fund people who are here that are not documented. We don't know, but that's what a audit would be. Now, the state funds that tie into Southern Illinois and the Metro East are the state funding. All right. State law mandates transfer to the public transportation fund. And like I told you, they just changed the law to promote that even more. So a portion of the state sale tax on gasoline is dedicated to statewide transit operations. So the estimate is $731 million annually starting in July 2026 based on the new law. And then they've got the Rebuild Capital Plan enacted in 2019, provides dedicated annual capital funds to transit agencies through bonding and increased user fees. So to bail out the Chicago Transit Authority, now they are redirecting funds. And the other source is federal funding, provides through various programs. But remember, we don't know once the money comes in from the federal government currently to the legislature and to the governor, what they're using that money for. And we need to have responsible people administering the money so that things get fixed infrastructure wise that need to be done on the roads with the Chicago Transit Authority, with the Metro East Metrolink system as well. And as far as I know, listening to the St. Louis City News, a lot of for the Metrolink here, it was funded by um, through the Metrolink Corporation. So no one ever said that the state of Illinois was helping for the Illinois side. And quite frankly, once you cross the Mississippi River, it stops at Mid America Airport now. So that's not very long of a distance. So in this part of the state, our funding wouldn't be as great as the funding for the Chicago area. And also, we can look at our roads and think that things just are not happening. So, as a voter, we need to think about that between the taxes and funding or overfunding a different part of the state, which is people's perception, which seems to be true, is very frustrating. And the reason to make the change, if I were running for governor, is that it can only get more expensive. Because if you take out the federal funding, which in the next several years, at least the next 3 years, is going to be the case, the only other way to get money is through taxing people who are currently working. And that's what the current system is already. Because remember, there's already been shortfalls, and we were $145 billion in debt from last fiscal year. Now I'm going to pivot to what the legislature's been doing or what they will be doing. It looks like that this year their focus is going to be on why the Illinois schools, and these are state schools, are losing revenue because people are not enrolling in the colleges. What that means is that there are 3 initiatives that they are working on that are going to eventually raise taxes on people paying taxes in the state. What are they doing? Well, they're trying to close the loop so that if you qualify as low income, that they're going to give out more money through grants to people making under, let's say, $20,000 a year, or, well, if the parents are, and that's still how education is done in the state for college. And then they're going to put the burden on the taxpayer yet again. Now, why this is important, and everybody should get help, but if the parents are making over whatever it is, between $40,000 and $60,000, well, that leaves out most of the state as far as funding goes. And why is that such a priority? Because students can get money, meaning that they can take out loans for college. Well, for the rest of us who were helping our kids through college, we felt like that we were being taken advantage of when there were some who weren't paying anything And I shouldn't use the word grant either, because grants can be for high achievers. But what they're trying to do in Illinois is to make it so that um, low income people will not have to pay any money whatsoever. And as governor, if I were running for governor, it has to be fair to all Illinoisans in the state. We keep targeting one group to completely take care of when all Illinoisans would need a little bit of assistance, even if it's not as high as other people making less money. And everybody wants to help. But as a moderate Republican, my opinion is, if I were running for governor, is that it has to be everybody pays something. And if we are accessing state funds for education, then if your need is greater, you get a little bit more. But every Illinoisan who goes to college will get some money. And this notion that the parents of people making more money should just pay all of it, that's unfair to people paying taxes when you're using public money to fund the schools. So I'll talk more about being the blend between what the legislature is doing and what the governor is signing in future podcasts. So now I want to quickly go to what I talked about with the U.S. federal policy on public safety and crime. So I've been watching the news, like I was telling you. 30 minutes watching the news is very challenging sometimes. But what's happening now is that crime, it appears that the mainstream media outlets are reporting stats on crime, and they've been focused on mainly sanctuary cities, where they're saying that last year the crime rates started going down. So since January 20th of this year, there's no credit being given to the efforts of the Trump administration with sending in ICE for um, getting people out of the states that are undocumented. And there's been a couple of bad things that have happened, but you can get that from other sources. The crime rates still seem to be higher than they should be. And if you look at the changes after we get people out of the country, the undocumented people, crime seemed to have legitimately gone down. And this is just based on looking from January 20th up until now. And that's across the board. And policy that I've seen seems to be working. And it also seems like that whoever is reporting it is first promoting that people here undocumented who are criminals that are being arrested, that their rights are being violated, because that's the rhetoric coming from some of the mainstream media outlets. And that gives you pause, because they should be focused on After January 20th of this year, with the help of ICE and other federal agencies, has crime actually started going down. And why is crime going down? Is it because of the presence of these people and of the National Guard? So, if that's true, they should get credit for it. And then other places, other states that had high crime, they're not even putting out any data for this year currently to see if, and one of the places is Maryland, for example, uh, LA County, Chicago, and they seem to spend a lot of time asking the question, well, can they legally remove people who are here illegally? And all of these things are related. If I were running for governor of Illinois, what the Illinois legislature is passing as laws in the state, and then crime and public safety, those are all a blend. And can we really trust some of the stats from 2024 without knowing why the crime went down or not? So numbers can be fudged depending on how you ask the question. Also, why can't you give the current administration any credit for what's happening? Now, that's an opinion. Based on the data, though, that I've seen, that actually makes sense that that question should be asked. And in Illinois, if you look at the laws that have been passed, they are promoting immigration with undocumented folks getting access to resources. And when we are tying up resources on immigration for undocumented people, if you look at the mass transit system, which is a great example, the governor is focused on immigration and also with taking care of people, the politicians in Chicago, with funding them for programs where they have mismanaged because the Democrats have been in charge of Chicago for decades. So facts and data do matter. And on the federal level, we are looking at how crime is resonating in Illinois because there is no funding for the police. There's no funding for our infrastructure and et cetera for the rest of the state for the infrastructure. And the federal policy is not being followed. That's why they, meaning the state of Illinois, is not getting funding for any of the things that I just said. This is Just Listen, hosted by George Live. Let me know what you think. All is not dark and bleak. The what we should be focused on is making changes so that taxpayer dollars can be spent on things that help all Illinoisans, not just a few.